Hi, everyone. Welcome back to New York Energy Week 2024 here on our conference, day 5, the epicenter of global energy innovation, where industry leaders, visionary, and pioneers gather to shape the future. This landmark event, now in its 11th year, unites the brightest minds to forge new paths and challenge the conventional boundaries of energy technology and sustainability. So thank you for joining us here on the One Business World platform for this transformative journey that promises to inspire, empower, and catalyze groundbreaking advancements here in the energy sector. So kicking things off for us here this morning from Washington, D.C. is Carla Frisch. She is the Principal Deputy Director, Office of Policy for the U.S. Department of Energy. And her topic this morning is how federal policy is driving clean energy progress and opportunities. Carla, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your presentation and your talk, and I'm happy to join you on the other side, okay? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to New York Energy Week for your focus. And today we're talking about how federal policy is driving clean energy progress and opportunity. And it has been quite a busy few years in the federal energy policy landscape. We saw 3 major pieces of legislation that add up to really significant investment in America's energy sector. The Inflation Reduction Act, which we like to think of as the lungs that breathe life into our energy economy by incentivizing deployment of clean technologies. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is the largest investment in the U.S. infrastructure in a century. We think of that as the backbone. And then the last body part, the brain, the Chips and Science Act, invests in cutting edge science and innovation, and really about the chips, the semiconductors that's in our phones, in our computers, making sure that we're making those here, in addition to other important investments. So all of those together has been a tremendous amount of opportunity, and we're starting to see really significant results across the economy. So for us, just at the Department of Energy, not including all the other federal agencies, you can see here the many areas that we're investing in through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and through the Inflation Reduction Act. So we know those who've worked on climate or energy security and resilience for a long time know there's not just one solution. We've got to make investments across all the different sectors of the economy, through the supply chain, through workforce, through communities. So what's been really exciting about these pieces of legislation is the opportunities that they're making across all of these different areas. Now, I want to highlight a few for you. So in particular, building out a clean, reliable, secure grid. We have been able to, through these laws, make a $13.3 billion investment, the largest ever direct investment in critical grid infrastructure. Part of that goes through formula grants, where we're giving a certain amount to certain entities. Part of that goes through competition, and it is serving all parts of the U.S. One that really stuck out to me is a rural co-op in Georgia who've been meaning to upgrade their transmission and distribution infrastructure for years, hadn't been able to do that, but with this funding, they were able to make that change for themselves. Another big area has been reducing costs through building upgrades. So energy efficiency, of course, the first fuel can help us with reducing the amount of energy use and just making buildings much healthier and a better experience. So these laws have allowed the Department of Energy to invest in homes and businesses and schools and nonprofits. For example, one of the projects that we have selected in schools is in Montana to help replace outdated propane heating in a school. In buildings, we've had almost $4 million for funding and projects across Alaska to help reduce operating costs of about 25 nonprofit buildings that are supporting lower to middle income and disadvantaged populations. So basically the buildings that are housing nonprofits who are helping people who need help are able to get the upgrades that helps them better serve those populations. Speaking of communities, we are investing many of these funds in underserved communities. You hear about Inflation Reduction Act as one of the largest investments in climate of all time. And yes, it's in climate, but it's also in supply chains, in justice, and in communities. Many of the provisions have special carve-outs or amounts of money that go specifically to communities. Energy communities, for example, by that we mean a community that maybe previously had a coal plant that shut down or had a coal mine that shut down or has a high level of energy workers. So we've been able to make funding specifically available to energy communities. And nearly $500 million has been made available specifically to support rural and remote communities with their own energy opportunities. One of the key factors here is what is that community's vision for their own energy sources, for their own future energy economic situation. So we can work with them to figure out what is their vision. They've got the talent, they've got the know-how, and how can we support that with federal funding and technical assistance. Importantly also, of course, is creating high quality, accessible careers. And we use the word career specifically instead of jobs, because what we're talking about is in the energy sector, making the training available that folks can choose to join a union, choose to get the skills that lead them on a career path. So family sustaining wages and the opportunity to have that career path over time. Some of the examples there include partnering with unions, with universities, with community colleges to help training programs train future clean energy workers. So one example is a program in Rhode Island that's providing no-cost energy assessments while training in energy engineering and technician students at a local community college. So energy assessment would be they go into a building and help figure out, where do we have leaks? Is there a crack in a window? Is there a place we need more insulation? And they figure out how to make those findings and how to make the upgrades. Another one is in North Carolina, Fayetteville University, which is a historically Black college, is helping to build up an energy management program in partnership with other local institutions. So two other areas I wanted to highlight for you are securing our supply chains and some really innovative things that are happening in industrial innovation. So in the supply chain front, we have invested, for example, in battery manufacturing. And batteries are really important for electric cars, also for grid hookup and grid resilience. So we've invested significantly in the production and of the batteries. We've also got a grant opportunity that helps factories that were previously producing internal combustion engine cars to produce EV cars. So those batteries is just one of the many supply chain investments, but those are really important to what we are calling onshoring or the fringe shoring of making sure that as we expand the set of energy technologies that we're making those here in the US or with trading partners that we feel are secure. And then in the industrial innovation space, this is a place that is just so impressive to me about the ramp up in activity and an opportunity. So for a very first time, DOE has provided grants for an industrial emissions reductions at a large scale. So we've got at-scale projects in cement and steel and glass factories. We have $8.7 billion for hydrogen. You may have heard about our hydrogen hubs. For a long time, we've been talking about the potential for a hydrogen energy economy, and we are right on the cusp of it. So we are supporting these hubs, which will help produce that hopefully low emissions hydrogen. And they're also looking on the demand side about how that's going to be used. So that's a really exciting opportunity. And then next, in particular for New York Clean Energy Week, I wanted to talk a little bit about nuclear energy because we are seeing several announcements in nuclear energy the past weeks and months. Of course, and Southern Company opened the Vogtle nuclear power plant. In March, we, through our loan programs office, offered a loan guarantee to reopen the Holtec Palisades nuclear power plant in Michigan. So this is a significant opportunity for jobs in Michigan, and part of the investments of thinking about, okay, what is it that a community wants to do going forward and how can we help them go along? In nuclear this week too, just last week, we had bipartisan legislation that supported nuclear. So some to do with permitting, some to do with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, some to deal with future investments in fusion. We've had record achievements with ignition at fusion in our national labs recently. And then also for nuclear, we've got tax credits and advanced demonstration reactor opportunities. So you name it in the energy technology space, and we are making major investments and starting to see those reflected in the real economy. So next, I did want to talk a little bit more about the tax credits. We have 20 new or expanded energy tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, these are run through the Treasury Department and through IRS. And those include, of course, credits for consumers and credits for businesses. So on the consumer side, there's quite a bit of opportunity for efficiency and clean energy at homes and also at businesses, and small businesses, large businesses. But you could actually get a tax credit for an energy audit to think about what would make sense in a home. And you can get a tax credit for installing efficient insulation, efficient HVAC. Then if you want to think about, okay, bringing some clean energy generation, you could do solar panels, you can do small wind, even small geothermal. There's tax credits for vehicles, for battery backup. It's really quite impressive. And part of the way that's designed in the tax code is that you can take advantage of that over 10 years. So 1 year you could do something, the next year you could do something else. Now for businesses, there's opportunities across each of these areas as well. So for clean electricity, there's what we call the PTC, the production tax credit, and the ITC, the investment tax credit. Those are for clean power production. In transportation, there's tax credits for used or new EVs and for charging. In fuels, there's tax credits for clean hydrogen and sustainable aviation. Buildings for efficiency, including there's a tax credit for building a new home. There's a tax credit for the builders if they build the new home efficiently. There's tax credits for carbon sequestration. And then an important new category, of course, is in manufacturing. So there's tax credits to support the domestic manufacturing of clean energy technologies. Now, there's a bunch more information about these for consumers at energy.gov/save, and then for businesses at irs.gov/cleanenergy. And I will say we're already seeing quite a bit of uptake. IRS is tracking that. In EVs, for example, more than 150,000 people have claimed the tax credit. In something called transferability, which is when a business is going to claim a tax credit and then actually transfer that to another business for tax reasons. And that's a number that IRS tracks. They've seen 59,000 registration numbers for projects or facilities across 50 states plus territories. So really impressive uptake of those tax credits already. Now, I did want to give you some specific examples about what we call 48C. So this is a 30% upfront manufacturing tax credit. So let's say you're building a facility to produce batteries. Or you're expanding a facility to produce batteries, you can apply for this tax credit. It covers lots of different topics. For example, critical minerals and materials, industrial decarbonization, grid components, and modernization. And what you see on the slide here is just a handful of the projects that have applied for, been selected for the tax credit, and then they've disclosed that they've received it here. So we've got a link there with a full list of those. But just to give you a sense of where some of those are and what some of the companies are. You know, these are large scale projects where they are manufacturing technologies in the US. And then you start to see, okay, what are the results of those types of investments in clean energy manufacturing? So this map is another thing that's live on the Department of Energy website, energy.gov/invest. And here we're tracking, since January 2021, what are all of the announcements by companies who are manufacturing clean energy. So this is not about power plants or actually producing electricity or producing fuels, which of course there's a ton of announcements in those topics as well, but this is actually manufacturing the clean energy technologies. So the batteries, the EVs, the solar, the wind, nuclear, hydrogen, heat pumps. Those are the ones we're tracking so far. And just since January 2021, we've seen 195 billion in announced private sector investments in new or expanded manufacturing. And each of those comes with significant opportunities for those communities. In some places, we're seeing these factories in places where they used to have a factory that produced something else that shuttered many years ago. So it's adding up to a quiet little domestic manufacturing revolution happening across the US. And on the map, you can see there just so many pins. And then those gray circles with numbers are areas where there's multiple pins showing up. So those too many to pop up on the map. But when you go on the live version, you can scroll in, you can scroll out, you can look all across the US. And this is something that we're updating all of the time. We keep putting up once a month, what are the new tracking of the new announcements that we've seen across the US. Now, separate from the manufacturing, I was talking a little bit about the generation. So we are also seeing some really significant advances and trends in the electricity sector of the US. So this graph, for example, shows US solar capacity. Going back to 2005, that's a benchmark year we often use for the US when we think about international negotiations and comparing US emissions, and that's our benchmark year. And if you look what was happening back then, there was a little bit of solar deployment, but it was too small to even show up on this size of a graph. And then that has been steadily growing. And then you can see the last couple of years have been record years for solar deployment, also for storage, which is often coupled with solar. And then you can look there in the 2024 bar, we are again projecting that this is going to be a record year for solar build out in the United States. It's also been record years globally, but you can see that this is just the historic and the one projection year. And when we look at out year projections, that curve is projected to significantly continue. So next, if you broaden out to solar, to all of U.S. renewable generation, we use different terms. Renewables are things like solar, wind, geothermal, where the fuel source is renewable. We use the term clean or zero emissions. We also look at the nuclear as a clean fuel. Well, what you're looking at here is just renewables, not including nuclear. So that black line is coal generation. So you can see back in 2005 where we were at coal generation, and that's been steadily coming down as plants have aged out or been costed out. And then the colors at the bottom there, you can see the wind in blue, the solar in yellow, and that steady uptick in renewables. And what we're looking at for 2024 is to see that crossover point. We're projecting to see renewable energy generation this year surpass coal. And then looking out even further to 2025, we'll continue that trend. In our modeling of the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the overall Investing in America set of investments is showing that in 2030, we would be growing really significantly on the clean energy generation from about overall and clean from about 40% of our clean generation now to 80% of our clean generation in 2030. And you can see one of the projections here on the chart that's showing a really significant amount of wind and solar build out. There's other ways that might play out with other technologies also being built significantly. Now, separate from the electricity sector, of course, in the transportation sector, we're also seeing some significant transformations. So this chart is showing electric light-duty vehicle sales, which are indeed growing quite quickly. So again, back in the 2005 timeframe, not enough to even show up on this chart. And then we had a steady increase, coming around 2010, 2011, 2012. Now, where we are now is about 10% of new EV sales, of new car sales are fully electric. That is a really significant growth. Since January 2021, EV sales have more than quadrupled, with about 4 million EVs on the road. And just from 2022 to 2023, the US had a 50% increase in 1 year. Not shown on this chart is the charging that comes along with electric vehicles. And at the end of 2023, the US had actually exceeded an initial target of having 160,000 level 2 and DC fast charger ports. And since the last 6 months in 2024, we've seen quite a bit of build out as well. Now, zooming out from here, we often look at the total US emissions. So this chart shows the total US greenhouse gas emissions. And then going back to 2005, you can see the 2005-2007 time period at the beginning of the chart. That was a peak for US emissions. And then in the black line, we were just slowly making progress on bringing those emissions down. Now, part of what we do as the US federal government is report to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and say, what is everything that we're doing in the US on emissions reductions? So in 2021, before the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we did our official projection and submitted to the UN, what you see there in the top bar in the red, of what our projection was for reducing emissions at that time. And that was about a roughly 20% reduction from the 2005 baseline. Then we passed the biggest set of climate policies in the nation's history, perhaps in the world. And then once we revise our official projection, which is a really significant undertaking where we go through every single program, every single tax credit the federal government is doing to assess what's the impact of those. When we resubmitted in December 2023 to the UNFCCC, we resubmitted the green line in the projection. And the difference between those is just wildly significant. The green line then puts us on track for a 40% reduction of emissions in 2030 compared to what we were in the red line, a 20% reduction in emissions. So it's a doubling in projected emissions reduction in the US. And that is significant on a global scale. If you look at global projections of emissions reductions, you can see a downward slope due to US investments. It's really incredible. Now, of course, since we're at Energy Week, many of you follow this closely, and you may be thinking, well, what's next? Because we have a commitment to get to net zero emissions by 2050. So this blue line here shows a projection of the path to net zero by 2050. So of course, there's much more to do to fully get down to net zero, but you can see that getting into the green line with the investments from Bill and Ira get us on the path to be able to head towards that net zero by 2050, which is a place we were not on path to head to back in 2021. But with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that really changed the trajectory of the US energy sector and of our emissions. So lots more to do here, of course, with state and local efforts, with business efforts and investments that many of you are leading on, with consumers. So this is a whole of society type effort to get on that blue trajectory to net zero by 2050. But we are within reach of doing that. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight a couple of key links for you all. So the energy.gov/invest includes the map that I showed, the manufacturing map of all of those announcements about clean energy manufacturing in the US. We've had a lot of interest in that. Energy.gov/save is our consumer-facing website to be able to go through and track what tax credit and rebate opportunities are available to consumers. I know many of you are with the private sector. Of course, you'll be looking on the IRS website for the details about the tax credit opportunities for your companies. But for you as individuals and families, this is a significant opportunity as well over the next 10 years. And then this last link, energy.gov/local fuel savings, it gives, it's a calculator that can help folks look at if they were to choose to move from an internal combustion engine vehicle to an electric vehicle, how would they actually save? And in fact, yes, in every county in the US, making the switch provides cost savings on fuel. We're talking up to $2,200, so really quite significant. That work has been done by Argonne National Lab, is available. You can go through and put in as much detail as you want. As I have this kind of car, I'm thinking about switching to this kind of car, what would be the savings? So just a ton of opportunity, and we do have additional grant opportunities. Many of those have been announced and awarded, but we do have new opportunities as well, and those are always listed at energy.gov/infrastructure. Well, with that, I'll say thank you and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Wonderful job. Great presentation. Quite quite a busy few years is an understatement. That's for sure. A lot of activity. Hey, on the map, that far pin that was down in the Caribbean, is that Puerto Rico or the Virgin
Yes,
Islands?
that Puerto Rico, yes, because it's a U.S. map. So we're tracking investments in Puerto Rico, and they have been really focused on the energy sector. We've seen some significant investments, both from federal dollars and from private sector dollars.
Well, certainly coming back from some of their terrible hurricanes and storms and things for sure. Yeah, that was an interesting piece. Although it's like, wow, look at that. Talk about far-reaching, right? The Michigan nuclear plant, that's interesting as well. Now you said it was loan guarantees to restore and resume. Do you know how long was it dormant? Was it shut down? Because that and the job numbers you talked about, those were significant as well for that.
Yes, and so that particular plant, yeah, they had made the decision a couple years ago to shut down. And with a nuclear plant, of course, our very first focus is safety.
Mhm.
And that's a big part of the Department of Energy mission is nuclear
Of course,
safety,
yeah.
both for the power enterprise, but also for nuclear weapons. But we have a program through our loan programs office, and people think of the loan programs office as they provide really big grants to companies who are doing innovative technology. And we do that, and we're welcoming applications. But through the Inflation Reduction Act, we also have a new program called the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, EIR, Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment. Or for those that like the tax code number, it's 1706, part of the legislative code. So that program says, okay, if a utility is retiring an old energy asset, could be a coal plant, could be another type of old energy asset, and they'd like to reinvest, reinvigorate, and have a new opportunity for a different type of energy asset or an upgraded type of energy asset, we can provide a loan or a loan guarantee to actually help the utility do that. And that's a new tool that
Mhm.
wasn't available previously through the federal government. But now that we are able to do it, and we're seeing some applications come in from utilities. And I think, for some of our private sector partners that work with utilities, it's something that definitely for you to be aware of.
Well, over the course of the New York Energy Week, we've had a number of talks, and what I found interesting too for that Michigan piece is it also includes the small modular reactor piece, and we've had a couple of people talk about that technology and the promise around that. So it kind of becomes not only do you bring back the original, but then you get that expansion for even more cutting edge type of technology, which is really exciting. I also thought the concept of what you talked about, high quality, accessible careers, so important, right? Not just a job, as you said, but really care for your family, lifelong ambitions. That type of employment, which is so important for the country. And again, so much good coming from that. All right. To quote a number, the 48C. Let me see if I got my notes right. The manufacturing. That's an impressive set of companies you had there already making those applications and scheduling those announcements. That was very impressive as well on the manufacturing side. And as any builder would tell you, the ability to have something come in up front, what a great way to jumpstart a project, right? And getting it up and running for sure. So Carl, so much going on. What do you think comes next?
Oh, great. Well, wait, you said you made so many great points. I just wanted to come back. What's
Sure.
coming next? Because you mentioned the small modular reactors.
Mhm.
So what's coming next on that in particular is we just announced last week a notice of intent, which is the Department of Energy way of saying heads up, it's not here yet, but it's coming. A notice of intent of 900 million for funding uh, for investing in small modular reactors. So we can have a team of a utility, the reactor vendor, others coming together for the first mover teams to get those small modular reactors built. So that's coming next.
That's
We've
a
got,
that's an interesting phrase too. First movers. That's very entrepreneurial.
yes, well, and that's, part of the government role when we think about we're using public funds to invest in energy technologies and deployment is for a first of a kind or a first at scale, how can we help catalyze that? And then speed things up that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And then, over time, in many places, then later back out of those investments when it's sustained by the private sector. But what's also coming next is we've got significant opportunities still for funding for grid resilience, another round of funding yet to come. And for consumers, I talked about the tax credits. Separate from the tax credits, there's a rebate program because not everyone pays enough taxes that it makes sense a tax credit doesn't help everyone, right? Because you got to be paying taxes. So rebate programs is basically like an upfront discount on an HVAC or an efficient water heater. And DOE is providing funding to states to set up those rebate programs. New York, of course, was a first mover in this instance, set up their rebate program. So those rebates are starting to become available across the country, and I think are really going to help a lot of families make investments in energy where they live, of course, can really help with comfort and health.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, congratulations on all your wonderful work. The lungs, the body, and the brain seem to be really moving, to quote your opening line or so, seem to be really moving the needle here. So thanks for all your leadership. Thanks for all the success here and continuing to advance things to the future. And as we look ahead, it's just so innovative. And thanks for giving people the opportunity and the tools, businesses, uh, the community aspect again is just so important. You had a number of points on like tribal funding, which is the underserved community, just outstanding, just outstanding. So Carla, thank you for joining us here at New York Energy Week, kicking things off here on day 5. Great job.
Well, thank you. And thanks for all of the critical conversations that you all are leading because we're at a time of great investment, of great opportunity, and we need the leaders that you all have brought together to help us move into those next steps. So thank you.
So thank you for joining us. Have a good rest of your day. Take good care. Bye bye.